Marjorie Taylor Greene has targeted for harassment the young survivors of school shootings. She has called the 9/11 attacks on the Pentagon a hoax, and she claims that Charlottesville protests and counter-protests were an inside job. More recently, Greene cheered on the January 6th insurrectionists, comparing what would become a deadly riot to the American Revolution. Greene also cements the GOP caucus as tolerant of racism. Her speech about Muslims and Black Americans is so offensive, we're not going to amplify it or repeat it here. To be clear, the vote that is getting underway minutes from now, it isn't even to purge Greene from the GOP caucus, send her home. No, it's just a vote about whether or not to strip her of her committee assignments. That's it. And Republicans could have done that all by themselves, could have taken care of business privately. But they refused to take any action themselves because there wasn't enough opposition to Greene and QAnon within the GOP. Let that sink in. Today, with her committee assignments on the line, Greene took to the House floor to offer, I don't even know what to call it, a half-hearted semi-walk back of some of her worst, most offensive claims. It's not worth repeating the excuses she offered or her belated acknowledgement that school shootings and 9/11 were real after all, especially since her speech today directly followed this defiant tweet sent out this morning. Quote, "It's not just me they want to cancel. They want to cancel every Republican. Don't let the mob win." Greene wrote that. Don't let the mob win. Now, either she has no sense of irony or is teaching a masterclass in projection. Greene and the mob are one and the same. Greene and the mob are on the same side. Greene and the mob and the insurrectionists are all on the side that stormed the Capitol in that deadly riot. And the mob is now under intense scrutiny by law enforcement, with serious charges beginning to pile up. The mob is really hoping that the GOP votes with them, lets Greene slide today. While the rest of us, we're just waiting and watching to see if the Republican Party will separate itself in any meaningful way from the mob today. That is where we start our coverage with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Tim Miller's here, former RNC spokesman and contributor to The Bulwark. Also joining us, Jason Johnson, journalism and politics professor at Morgan State University. He's a contributor to MSNBC and The Griot. MSNBC political analyst, former Senator, my friend Claire McCaskill's here, and MSNBC's Garrett Haake is live for us on Capitol Hill. Garrett Haake, we start with you where it's all going down. What's the latest?
Well, we're in a motion to adjourn right now, a procedural step by House Republicans to draw this process out. Frankly, it caught me a little bit by surprise because I think a lot of the thinking was House Republicans knew they were going to have this vote today. They weren't particularly excited about the prospect of having to defend Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they were just going to kind of yank this tooth, get through this vote, and move on. But look, it looks like here's where we are. This speech that Greene gave on the floor today, I'm told, is very similar to the one she gave behind closed doors to Republicans last night. I think it may be enough to consolidate Republican support behind her, but I don't think it convinced a single Democrat to change how they feel about her comments, both before she was a member of Congress and up till this very day. I talked to a Democratic member after her speech today who told me, said she's never done drugs. Maybe she should, that this is just sort of stuff that's too far out of bounds, too far from the normal to come back and be explained away. But I think the key thing that we've learned today from Speaker Pelosi, who talked about this a little bit at her news conference, and from other Democrats that I've talked to is, as a member of Congress elected by your constituents, you can come here and say, the moon landing was fake and the earth is flat and birds aren't real, but you can't project violence. You can't endorse violence on your colleagues. And that's the line that Democrats feel like they absolutely have to draw here today, and why they're going to have this vote, and why, if the numbers continue to look the way they've looked all day, Marjorie Taylor Greene will be stripped of her committee assignments in an unprecedented move before the sun goes down tonight.
Garrett, I just want to poke a little bit in this notion that she's said anything on the floor that solidified GOP support, because it's revealing. I'm sure your reporting is accurate, but it's revealing. So what she said was that she stumbled upon QAnon at the end of 2017 when she was searching online because she didn't trust the media. The conclusion, she said, quote, "Will we allow the media that is just as guilty as QAnon of presenting truth and lies to divide us?" I mean, that's demonstrably false. And if that line quote, will we allow the media that is just as guilty as QAnon of presenting truth and lies to divide us? If that line won them over, we've got bigger problems than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, let the record show I've never accused anyone of being a lizard person or a cannibal, and I'm a card-carrying member of one of those groups, the media, not QAnon. Look, Republican members, we've talked about this in other contexts, Nicole, and I think it's important. Republican members in a lot of districts look back at their constituencies and they don't fully understand them. And in many cases, they're confused by them or even a little bit nervous or afraid of elements of their voters back home. And the QAnon thing is part of that. And I think I think a lot of members heard that and thought, okay, so she flirted with QAnon and she backed away from it. A lot of people in my district are probably the same way. That may be good enough. And the other thing they're going to fall back on, and you're going to hear this quite a bit in the next hour of debate when it resumes here, is the idea that this is just Democratic overreach, punishing her for speech before she came here. I don't think that carries much water, but those are the arguments upon which House Republicans have built their defense or their willingness to look away from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Claire McCaskill, I need to bring you in here, my friend. I mean, this feels at this point like a charade. I mean, someone trotted her out, likely Kevin McCarthy, to the floor to offer an apology, and she said that she stumbled upon QAnon. You know, she's basically, it's heroin, and likened it to the media. That's not an apology. That should have zero impact on what happens today.
It should, but I have just to take a moment here at the beginning. Happy birthday to you, Nicole. And I will confess, this is part of my husband's birthday cake. His birthday was on Monday.
Do you have a cake? I have to put on my glasses.
And I do not want to sing, because if I sing, we'll lose every single person in the audience. So I will not sing. I'll blow out the candle for you. But happy birthday, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Oh, and Honey the dog just ran through. We were losing complete control, and it's only 4:09.
Losing control. Okay, so
thank you.
let's go back to Crazy Town. Let me go back to Crazy Town for a minute. Here is the biggest problem I had with the QAnon lady's speech on the floor of the House. She lied, Nicole. She said she'd said these things before she was elected. Yeah. You know, she said these things after she was elected. On December 4th, she said that an article that called QAnon objective information and unifying for Christians was accurate. On December 4th, we're not talking about when she was in college. We're not talking about when she didn't know any better. This was after she'd been elected to the House of Representatives. She was lauding an article that called QAnon objective and saying how accurate that article was. She's lying on the floor of the House in order to avoid being removed from her committees. Now, the other part of this that's really interesting is if they would do a secret vote, she would have a wide margin of folks that would take her off of her committees, just like Liz Cheney had. Once they didn't have to be public, once they could hide and not have to be courageous, a lot of them did the right thing. And I think they would today if they didn't have to go public.
It's so twisted, though. I mean, doing the right thing used to mean getting rid of the person that doesn't think 9/11 was real, and not too long ago. Tim Miller, I want to play you something that Senator Danforth had to say about today's GOP.
The Republican Party today is not just different from what it had been, it's the opposite in many ways of what it had been. America needs a strong, responsible, conservative party. That has been the Republican Party. It is neither strong nor responsible nor conservative today. But the worst thing is that we have become really a kind of a grotesque caricature of what the Republican Party has traditionally been.
Tim Miller, sounds like something you might say.
Well, I'm happy that Senator Danforth's been speaking out, and he's been really clear-eyed about Josh Hawley, who he was an early supporter of, and calling him out for participating in these lies. I think he's exactly right. I think the key word there is what the Republican Party has traditionally been. I think we need to recognize that the Republican Party is not what it's traditionally been. That doesn't mean that it was perfect in the past. That doesn't mean